Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of a 3-part series with Infobip and Bright Talk. And today we're going to talk about understanding the new consumer path to purchase, specifically around what has changed, how does technology play in that, and then how are we communicating to consumers. And I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Sherry Rosso, former executive with Best Buy for 25 years, and really excited about these topics. I have a bit of experience in this area as well. It's really fun to host this really smart panel. So with that, I just want to have the group introduce themselves and then we'll get right into it. So I'm going to start with Eric, if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick intro. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sherry. My name is Eric Pilkington. I am a senior partner at IBM, and I lead customer experience growth and innovation for the Americas.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eric, so much for being here. And it's Friday, so that's even more important, right? Kicking us into the weekend. Glenn, right. Would you like to go next, please?
That's perfect. Hi, I'm Glenn Figenholz. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at the Swanson Group.
Very nice. Thank you so much. And Ted, last with you.
My name is Ted Schwan. Good morning, everyone. I work for Infobip, and I'm the Director of Product Strategy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I'm really excited about this conversation. I think we could go on forever. What I want to start with is really what's changed and how does technology play in it. And what I love about this is that we're talking about 18 months. So many times we've had conversations and panels, we're talking about pre and post COVID, right? Or at the tail end of what has been a horrible pandemic. So 18 months in we're kind of still, we're in it, but we're not at the very beginning. So I want to start with that. And maybe Eric, you can start us off. How have consumer expectations and path to purchase behavior shifted within that 18-month period? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and frankly, it's one that I get asked a lot. Personally, and maybe I'm a bit in the minority here, but I don't personally think that consumer expectations have really shifted or changed much in the last 18 months at all. I actually think that we've been at this proverbial tipping point for a while where fickle customers really demand that brands know them, that they anticipate their needs, and even in many instances are doing things for them. And the need for intelligent or personalized commerce has certainly accelerated, perhaps as a byproduct of the pandemic. But I think it's suffice to say that most consumers today will abandon brands that don't deliver on these expectations or support their values, and even if it means paying more for those who do. So I think this is a trend that is certainly going to continue well into the future, and it's one that I'm working hard every day to help brands solve for.
Yeah, that's awesome. And with a name with an IBM behind your name, no pressure. So Glenn, I want to ask you the same question, whether you agree or disagree with Eric, but also, maybe, some specifics around, you touched on personalization. We're totally going to get into that, and expectations of, you should know everything about me, but there is a big brother aspect to that, which can be a little scary, right? But what do you think has shifted, and what kinds of expected changes are still on the horizon?
Yeah, it is a great question. I think everything is just happening more quickly in general, right? The pace of e-commerce development and how quickly everyone's been able to really evolve the business. But I think that will continue into the future. And what historically could have been 3, 5, 10-year cycles will be shrunk down to 1, 2, or 3 years, because the speed and the adaptation and acceptance of change continues at an accelerated rate. I think overall, there's two different paths that we'll continue to go down. I think the definition of convenience and speed that a consumer has changed materially. What used to be 1 day is now 1 hour, and what used to be 3 days is 1 day. And so I think that will continue over time, and those that can best kind of crack the code of meeting the consumer proposition and the convenience profile that they have is really about the definition of value for them over time that will be sustained. I think what will continue in the future, I think the next 6-12 months ahead are going to be very interesting, as we've obviously seen a material shift in the economic factors driving the business, right? So inflation is real. and how are consumers going to respond? And then, is there a recession that's right on the cusp of happening? And if you go back to the boom that the dollar stores had, as an example, during the last recession, what is that next phase from a retail standpoint overall that will occur? And then how do consumers' behaviors change to meet those needs when they're looking at the gas pump, they're looking at their grocery bill, and the economy is not doing what it was? That will change. And I think, that is yet to be seen. But I think we have to think about where that's going to continue to deliver on that proposition.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to add there? I would say I'm intrigued by expectations have changed. Behaviors maybe haven't. Acceleration certainly has by way of a pandemic. And then what's going to stick? So maybe, Ted, I'll ask you, everyone seems to be thinking about the same things. The same things need to change: convenience and speed, and then full service still very real. I think that there's more of an expectation for you to service me in my home, things like that. There's the whole post sale situation, modifications of delivery, things like that. Like there's a whole post sale thing, but just kind of coming back to what does great look like? If everyone's thinking the same way, what is exceptional service? Ted, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's really 4 themes here, and I concur, of course, with what Glenn and Eric also mentioned. So number one is just this theme of mobility and being able to communicate with the customer throughout the entire journey at any time over mobile. So mobile strategy, especially with COVID, is just ever more important. I mean, probably the industry from this perspective moved at least a solid 5 or 8 years ahead. Some even say a decade ahead, right? So that's one key piece. Another key piece is just this whole social selling, which is now so robust. So you have companies that are bringing the journey, the customers, from the awareness stage to the consideration phase, even through the buying stage. That can all happen inside of a social media app at this point, right? And that really now drives this whole concept of real-time communications. Typically, aside from voice, customers or companies have used email, more so now SMS, and those are great. But email isn't really real time. SMS is kind of bland, right? So people are now, and users, I think, are expecting more and more. We'll see users expecting to have rich two-way experiences across, whether it be chat applications, social media channels, et cetera. And that really then brings me to the 4th point, which is it has to be consistent across all these channels. Mm-hmm. There's nothing worse when a person starts on this device, they get in their car, they do something else, they arrive at the store, it's something else, and they don't want to repeat themselves. They may be returning a product, maybe be a little bit upset at the moment. If you can't really understand that and bring context and sentiment across all these channels and devices, you're setting yourself up to fail. So I think that's really where companies should be looking for improvements.
Yeah, that's really great. And being one of those social selling clickbait human beings myself, my husband teases me. I get a box. He's like, let me guess, clickbait. Well, yes, of course. I mean, it makes sense. It's marketed to me. Why wouldn't I want that, sweatband that goes on your wrist? This is my latest purchase, by the way. You put them on your wrist so when you're washing your face, the water doesn't go down your arm. I mean, ladies, guys, hello. Makes total sense, right? So I will not apologize for that.
Share the link, please. No, I'm kidding.
Right. So maybe, Eric, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. Yeah. Who's doing this well? What have they done differently? And just in general, like how do companies evolve the customer strategy, knowing in some cases the customer's being forced to move in a direction, not being asked? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? And maybe you can all weigh in on that one.
Yeah, and actually, Sherry, if it's okay, I'd like to maybe just back up for a half a second and maybe just add onto the last question that Ted just answered. But for me, I think what sets a lot of brands apart in terms of who and maybe this even gets into the question you just asked, which is who's doing it well and why. Don't underestimate the power of human-centered design. So you just mentioned the sweatbands, for example, right? Somebody clearly recognized that as a pain point and designed a product that effectively addressed that. And there's no technology in a sense in that other than maybe the fabric they're using to to stop the moisture, if you will, from running down your wrist. But I think, the challenge with that, I think a lot of folks come up against, and this may sound odd, being someone who's at IBM, which is very much a tech company, is that there's an over-reliance or an over-indexing on technology to solve the world's problems. And at the end of the day, a lot of the problems we're talking about are very human. And technology needs to work in service to the human. And so I actually think that brands that are doing it really well are the ones that have figured that out, right? They've figured out equitable ways to leverage technology, data, to leverage a variety of marketing, advertising, all of the channels, that Ted and Glenn were describing earlier, to their fullest advantage. They're of course scraping signals and scraping all kinds of data and insights about their customers in real time in many cases, and quickly being able to sort of leverage that data in highly effective ways to constantly engage that consumer in a meaningful way. But I think at the end of the day, right, it comes down to human need, human challenges, latent needs, right, and being able to solve for real pain points and real frictions that exist in real markets. And I think if you look historically at brands, for example, like Nike, right, Nike has done an incredible job of not just simply figuring out better ways to sell sneakers, right, but a lot of the products, a lot of the things that you see on shelf, or the things that you find you see them pulsing to market, are very much built on the insights that they're gleaning from their customer interactions that they've had for decades. They're using that data not only just to spawn new products and services, but even new businesses, right? They've developed a direct-to-consumer business that lives in service to parents of kids who outgrow their sneakers every month. They've developed a range of technologies, yes, but technologies that are helping athletes to better understand, right, their bodies better, their nutritional needs, and a variety of other variables that are going into help folks either lose weight and be healthier for the general consumer, or helping elite athletes effectively become more elite. So I think it's brands like that are doing incredibly effective jobs. And by the way, right, bridging the divide, if you will, if there is one, right, between online and in store, right. So they're creating that unified, personalized experience that very much transcends channel into their even brick and mortar stores. So understanding the customer and being able to create very bespoke experiences for their customers, they're doing an incredible job. And there are other examples too, but I certainly would point to Nike as one that's doing it really well.
Yeah, I would agree. And interesting that Nike changed their whole supply chain around direct to consumer versus, I think they pulled out a DSW as an example. So the whole strategy has changed there. It's fascinating to me because you're essentially saying I'm going to reformat who gets my shoe, how they get it, which is just fascinating. I think, Glenn, anything to add on that? How and Ted touched on it as well with constantly communicating. I think of the customer thread as don't break the thread. If you can keep the customer whole throughout the entire experience, and that thread is so fragile and it can break, and then, you could lose it forever. So how do you get your retailers to, bridge that gap between online and brick and mortar? And what does that look like?
Yeah. And I think one thing to even add, and it goes to it, is I think we've talked a lot about technology and how that has evolved, how consumers make their choices. But, I think an example, you look at something like Apple, where actually the consumer experience is about, having that object, that item in front of you, and the end to end, when you open it up, the joy you feel, the simplicity of the packaging, the experience of buying an Apple product. And I think that is actually part of the bridge to retail as well. So how do you deliver on that? So it's not just, I had a great experience online, it was very engaging, it gave me a positive connotation to the brand, and then a brown box is at my doorstep, and I kind of lose that experience throughout. So how can retail actually help continue to build that bridge on the consumer proposition and engaging your brand in the right way, while supporting what the retailers are trying to do as well, and meet in the middle that customer experience at shelf continues to be a massive opportunity. And as we think about, a true omni-channel experience, that's what's going to have to continue to evolve. I think everyone is continuing to develop that. What is needed in a store? What is needed online? How do you engage a consumer at shelf, but still offer a digital proposition at the same time? I think that's part of this next phase of growth across the retail and manufacturer landscape to help unlock that proposition more easily and deliver the right value creation for everybody involved on the string, if you will.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like you brought up simplicity and opening the box and the thing, and it's like there should be a spotlight on it because it's so pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that, and it's not on the script, guys, but I think it's important to talk about packaging. You mentioned the brown box on the doorstep. I feel like, and I'd love to just have a quick sidebar on this one. How do you feel about packaging? Because I think if the product is quality, the packaging shouldn't cost more than the product. And I end up throwing away these beautiful cosmetic boxes that, the lipstick comes in as an example. Like, I actually now feel from a sustainability perspective, that's a mistake. And I think more millennials, more people are interested in sustainability and responsibility. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? I know it's a bit of an aside, but from a consumer perspective, I have an expectation that you don't waste.
No, I think that's Sherry. I think that's spot on. I do think sustainability is obviously a big opportunity across the board, and you have organizations like Loop and whatnot that are developing new ways that you can still create an enticing package to the consumer, but have the sustainability aspects and the reusability aspects to it as well. And so I think packaging has to sell the product in many ways, right? I mean, obviously you have more accessibility online. We all could probably joke about now how prevalent a QR code is and can help educate consumers in a different way that we didn't think about even 5 years ago. But in the end, especially when you're talking about an on-shelf, how do you differentiate, pop off the shelf and engage the consumer, both from a visual standpoint and an education standpoint? Mm-hmm. And how are you getting and using that space appropriately, that it's not wasted, that it's not, I need scissors to open up the package within the package to get to my product, but continue to support it in the right way because it is part of the brand and the end-to-end 360 journey that you're going to go on with that product.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I think that the sustainable part of all of this, in my mind, is very much as much a part of the experience. I think that the challenge for brands is to figure out ways in which they can still command a premium experience, but perhaps do it with fewer materials or recycled materials, or without producing more carbon, right? And reducing plastic and all of the things that we know are vital to the earth, for survivability's sake. But I think that's the challenge. I think even millennials and Gen Z still expect an experience. There's a reason why they shop at Apple, right? They expect that unboxing, if you will, to have that spotlight kind of come down from the sky and illuminate the product that they're now about to unbox. I just think, again, there are probably ways in which that can be done in more sustainable ways, and I think that's the challenge for a lot of brands.
Yeah, and I think Apple, it's still very minimal. Apple is one of the better ones. There's not a whole lot of bell and whistle inside that box. You oftentimes think, am I missing something? Because it is pretty streamlined, and even to the point where you can, as long as you have the right charger, really, do you even need a new charger if you've purchased before? I mean, there's so kind of bringing me to the next part around personalization. You can, tying in what that person has purchased in the past, tying in, you probably don't need a charger. Would you elect to get this without one? What does that look like, Glenn? And Ted, I would love to throw it up to you too, around, because you started us out on this path of communication throughout as well. So let's chat about personalization, and then when is too much too much?
I think we all probably have seen and experienced too much being too much. But, I think, to me, personalization is really about capitalizing on the technology that does exist today. It allows a much more laser focused delivery system, if you will, to meet the consumer where they want to be met. I think it's important to engage in the right way. I think it is important to then, know who your target is and really be ruthless against them. And personalization allows that. And I think that's why I've seen so many brands continue to thrive in digital commerce space, because you can ruthlessly target who your consumer is. You don't need the mass media TV campaign any longer. That is, unattainable for many cases in a startup brand, but you can really know who your consumer is and really pinpoint it and develop those assets along the path to purchase journey to engage them, convert them, and then how do you leverage the post shop as well to bring them back and keep them part of the family? And once you get them once, that's the easiest part. That personalization engine becomes even more because you have that history built into it. So it's really about leveraging, the right scale return on investment that you can make against a brand and targeting a consumer and not trying to be everything to everybody along that path.
Yeah, that's really great. Ted, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to add, so totally concur, but also I think a lot of thought needs to be put into, you do have all these options from a channel perspective, but when it comes to customer preference, there's also channel preference. And they may want to, for example, only engage in a support conversation over messaging, versus some may only want to do that over the phone or in face-to-face in store. So I think that's a large part of segmentation that still can, I think, can use a lot of work in the industry, is really going to those finer details now, because we do have a lot of this data here. Unfortunately, at times it's in silo to silo, and I think a lot of people during the pandemic specifically, had to come up with real quick solutions real fast. The house was on fire kind of thing, and that did at times generate some new silos of data. So I think it's a time to kind of rethink what you've done during the pandemic, and then really trying to focus in more on not only which channels do you use, but what kind of content do you serve, or should your customers expect over those channels?
Yeah, that's great. And what you said something really good, important about how once you've got them, you've got them. But I would even say, how do you get them? And many, if you get off your couch and walk into a retailer, I feel it's so easy not to. It's so easy for me to sit home in my bunny slippers and place orders and get boxes. It means a lot if I'm going to get off my couch or out of my office or wherever and actually go into a retailer. I feel like there needs to be something there for me. How do you convince a customer to take advantage of all the things we can offer them by turning location services on that device? Because you don't have it on, you miss out, right? A lot of you guys know better than I do, being on the business end of it, my whole career has been, how do I get an educator, an employee in a store to explain to the customer that if they turn on location services, we'll be able to give them offers specific to what they purchased in that location without being creepy, right? Mm-hmm. And so once you have them, but how do you get them? And it goes a little bit to AI and ML, which is a little part of, machine learning. And even if I dare say, like, human-centered design, where do you put the humans versus where do you leverage the bots? Because bots they can kick you out of everything you don't want to be kicked out of. They can add pain, they can remove pain, like all of the things. So I'll just open it up. I know that was a garbage can, but maybe you guys we can just riff on that for a bit.
Well, it's definitely an easy thing to deploy a bot that doesn't really provide a lot of utility and frustrates customers. So now we're definitely doing better than we used to do in this area. And part of that is because the NLU, the NLP, which is basically all the natural language understanding and processing things, are getting really, really, really good now. So just out there, if you do have a bot, please continue to tune it. Do so frequently, at least once a year, I would say. Update and take a look at the technology that you're using, because it's just moving so fast. Back to location services, I totally agree. We were recently just speaking with a prospective company who opens up new locations from time to time and really wants to seed that market prior to So we were discussing the ways that they can kind of create a radius around the new location as shoppers do come in if they have their mobile app, push them gently, some kind of in-app message saying you're just about to pass a brand new location opening on May 1st kind of thing. So it's not creepy. They may find it great. Oh, I didn't realize one was so close. I would have driven right past it kind of thing, right? So I think that's a way to do that. And there are, stats, if you do use either from a website, web push, or mobile app, in-app or mobile push, the buy rates, the conversion rates, they go up by hundreds of percent if it's involved in a campaign. So it can be overused for sure, but I think there's definitely a non-creepy way to do that does provide a lot of utility.
Yeah, and the overuse is pretty obvious when it happens. And I don't know about any of you, but for me, I very quickly disengage from that retailer if I'm hit too much. Yeah. Eric and Glenn, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, I always say, look, context is king, right? So even in instances where you're using location data as a way to potentially open up the lines of communication between a brick and mortar retail or an experience and a consumer, in my mind, simply asking the consumer, 1, 2, or 3 questions, and then providing a contextually rich response that enables you to potentially draw them into an offer that is legitimately right for that customer or not, right? Make that determination quickly, in my mind, is a real opportunity that I think a lot of brands overlook. We still tend to live in this push mindset where I'm going to push communications at you and hope you respond. But communication very much needs to be two-way. And I think using zero-party data and using other techniques to engage and draw consumers in is something that I think brands probably need to be paying a lot more attention to.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And I agree with both what Ted and Eric said there. I think, the only other thing I would add is it really comes down, the way I would position it is trust. And do I trust you, be it a retailer or brand, to engage me in the right way and not waste my time and push too much? And so how do you do that in the balanced approach? And I think you need to engage the consumer on the journey to gain that trust, to allow that access over time. And I don't think we're fully there yet. And I think it continues to be an opportunity for everybody across the board for growth as this continues to evolve in a personalization mindset.
Yeah, one thing I would add to moving away from the marketing aspect of personalization, or communication in general, not personalization, but being at the point of purchase in a brick and mortar location or online, streamlining the amount of time you have to ask me for the same thing is extremely important and extremely frustrating. And if you put it into a brick and mortar setting, you're now wasting labor because you're having to swivel chair between different types of forms and formats to gather that information. So that is a form, obviously, of streamlining communication on behalf of the consumer, because that will show up in your satisfaction scores. That will show up in you're supposed to be this kind of retailer. Why are you still asking me for all of this information? I just gave you that information. Don't you have it? Say, I have a membership with you. Why aren't you using that? So there's still that sort of super frustrating, again, the thread, right? That's where it breaks. And so, and Ted, you mentioned communication throughout, and I keep going back to that, but how do you consolidate? How do you start to consolidate? And I'm going to start with Eric, because he's been nodding his head like crazy, and then I'll move, and then you guys pick up where you want.
Well, yeah, you kind of read my mind a bit. I think that, especially for brands who already have a relationship with a consumer, or if they're already, considered to be quote unquote a high value, customer, you should know a lot about that customer. I was laughing and nodding in a sense because I was recently working with a major telco who asks the same questions of an existing customer as they would if that person was coming in for the first time off the street, in terms of how many lines do they need, and what is their data usage? Well, you're a customer, you should know these things, right? So at the end of the day, I think there's that element. There's also the other element of, how do I actually use publicly available data or data that I know is available to me with the right permissions in highly equitable ways. I started a startup years ago that was focused on the P&C insurance space, and one of the things that we did when we asked, when somebody was looking for homeowners insurance, we asked them two questions, right? What's your name and where do you live? Mm-hmm. I don't need to know when your roof was replaced or how old your house is. That's all public record. So, how do I start to use what is available to me to create that better experience that at the end of the day is going to lead to a much better outcome and potentially a relationship with that customer? I think that's the thing that, again, I think a lot of brands and folks tend to miss.
And 1 out of 10, where are we at?
I mean, right? I'm a bit of a pessimist in this space. I mean, I've been working in the personalization space, very much so for over a decade in various capacities. But I actually think that, there's probably more folks that get it wrong than get it right these days. And so I think on a scale from 1 to 10, I still think we're like at a 3, 4. Yeah. Right? I think the potential to be an 8 or 9 is certainly there. But I go back to the fact that I think a lot of businesses, marketers, brands, right, are trying to solve problems for themselves, and they're not necessarily, in lock and step with what consumers' needs really are or what they might be. And so I think using data and using technology to more effectively get at that is something that I think is a huge opportunity.
Ted or Glenn, anything to add there? Great. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm looking at my notes here to make sure I capture it, but where then do you put your money as a retailer? So, working with I shouldn't even just say retailer, just any business actually. I mean, the health industry is booming like crazy. And where do you spend your money? Where are you placing your bets? So as we think about discovery through post-purchase, is it all things are equal? Is it, start here if you invest here? I've heard nothing short of 1 million times in the last few months about computer vision. How are you leveraging computer? More laughing, right? How are you? Because again, as a business person, you want me to come to you and say, here's the problem I need you to solve. You don't want me to come to you and say, I hear that computer vision's great. Let's do that. I mean, I have no clue what I'm saying.
Or meta, right?
Yeah. So where do you invest?
Well, I mean, I think what's important is there's not one answer there, right? I think as you think about it, it depends of where you're at in the life cycle of being a retailer or a brand and leveraging that reach, right? And so I think you still need a balanced approach. If you invest and put all your eggs in one basket, if you will, you're probably a bit too narrow focused. But you also don't want to spread yourself too thin that you're just trying to get a little bit of everything, but you have scale in nothing. And so I think it's kind of looking at, where's that right in consumer engagement opportunity and leaning into, the top 2, 3, 4 things that you can do that then tie back to your consumer targets. And are those the best way to reach them and engage them where they want to be engaged and communicated to?
That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I would go back to the 4
go ahead.
Earlier, which was basically the themes around mobility. I mean, really, if you've got money and you're looking to try to optimize, really make sure that your mobile strategy is really up to date. Okay. Your social media profile, if that's where your customers are, the real-time nature of it. And again, not just from the promotional aspects of it. No one wants to wait on a 1-800 number. Right? Give them an opportunity to say, would you like it to start a messaging application and get immediate service, sir? Yes, of course, please, let me do that instead of waiting on the phone for 30 minutes. And then again, consistency. I think if you follow those 4 trends consistently across the channels and the others, I think you'll find a good spot to probably invest and optimize your customers' journeys.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it comes back to data. I think that a lot of clients that I work with, frankly, I tell them all the time, expire your data, right? Stop doubling down on data that's quantitative at best and that's 10 years old. And I think being able to collect the right types of data that are, valuable components to a lot of the equations that we're sort of laying out here. I think super important. Not underestimating the power of human insight and ethnography, and really understanding your customers' needs and how you can solve for those things across channels. I think that's super important.
Yeah, that's great. And finally, just one last piece of advice that you would give organizations or customer experience leaders, I think you all just hit on it a little bit, but I want to make sure to give you an opportunity to help us close out this session. Anything else that you would add or offer up as advice to anyone who might be listening today? I'll start with you, Glenn.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a common theme throughout, but it is know your customer.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the ultimate is, if you know that customer, you know how to engage them, you know what they're looking for, and you're able to build your brand accordingly. Don't try to be everything to everybody, but really focus in on that target and meet them where they want to be met.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. I mean, I said it a second ago, but I will echo it again, right? I mean, expire your data. And if you really want to understand consumer behavior, right, just like a lion, right, go to the jungle, not the zoo, right? So you really need to understand really how and where folks really want to interact and engage with you, and understand their problems, understand their latent needs, and figure out innovative ways to solve for them. I think if brands can effectively do that and continuously leverage data in more effective ways to extend that relationship, I think they'll find themselves in a really good place.
That's great. Ted, anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say if you haven't already, I would take serious stock of what some brands are now using from a channel perspective, things like WhatsApp for Business, things like Apple Business Chat, if you're brick and mortar, Google Business Messaging, because the experience there, the rich content and the two-way experiences that you can have between a brand and the end user is really, it's phenomenal. It's night and day compared to where we were. So I would seriously consider at least taking a look at them, make sure you understand what they are and see if they're right for your business.
That's great. The one thing I would add is know when and when not to use a bot.
Yes.
And, having spent a bit of time in rolling out robotics process automation, that's a good place to use a bot. I think where it gets a little tricky is when you start to involve the public,
Yes.
in ways that it can be a little bit more damaging than good. I want to thank you all so much. I know everyone's so busy, and this is a crazy time for all of us, going from, switching of the seasons, although in Minnesota you wouldn't know it if it hit you. But I just want to thank you again, and you guys are great. And the next episode, which we're really excited about, is going to flip a little bit to operational efficiencies and customer experience and customer service experience. So if everyone who's out there has interest in those topics, please register for that. And then once again, Ted, Eric, and Glenn, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Same, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.